getting someone on who's not a Tom Petty fan, I think is
Yeah.
an interesting proposition, right? But obviously, like I said to you offline, getting someone who I know has an excellent ear for music, is a musician, has a background in music appreciation and being able to critique it. I think that at least then you get some place to go with it. Because if it was just someone who'd never heard of Tom Petty, but didn't know how to talk about music, then it would be a little bit, I like that one. I didn't like that one. This one
Right.
was a bit
Yeah.
noisy. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, exactly. It's a little loud for my ears.
yeah.
No, I'm with you. Yeah. No, I appreciate it though. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to it. I just love how I keep getting invited to things that I know nothing about. Like
Yeah.
I'm literally like the least knowledgeable guy on the Van Halen show. Aerosmith, I knew 2 albums really well, a couple of hits and nothing else. We just recorded a backtracks for Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which I haven't seen. It's just amazing. It's like the only place I feel at home is the Deep Purple podcast, because those guys I grew up with.
Yeah.
But everybody else, I'm just like, yeah, okay, I'll love to dig in and talk about it. But I'm always open to it. That's the thing, is I'm not like, oh, I don't know anything about that, so I don't want to do it. I'm like, I want to learn something and have my horizons broadened a little bit too.
Well, that's a good segue into, I was going to ask you, because you do a lot of different things. And I always sort of, I sort of regard myself a little bit as a restless creative. That's what I always said. But I would say that you're bordering on sort of the polymath renaissance man, because you're a novelist, a humorist, a musician, songwriter, podcaster. Like there's so many different things you do. And I made a conscious, I've told other people this, but I made a conscious decision about 7-8 years ago to stop saying no. If someone says, hey, do you want to do this? Well, yeah, sure. So my friend Randy, the guy I do the Queen podcast with, once he said, we're doing this show, we're closing the show at the reggae festival. For the encore, for the last 2 songs, do you want to get dressed up in an inflatable dinosaur costume and come out and dance to the dance floor? I'm like, absolutely, sign me up. Why not?
Yeah. Who says no to that?
Exactly, right? So just say yes. So how did you, let's start there then. So what's your background in sort of music? Let's start with music maybe. You didn't grow up in Vegas where you live now, right? So
No. I was born just outside of Detroit. Started playing guitar when I was 6. And I don't know if you are old enough to remember this toy, but the Magical Musical Thing, which was sort of a battery operated stick that just had colorful buttons that were different notes, and you could get a songbook. Yeah. So I started on that, and guitar. I didn't really get along with guitar very well. For my 7th birthday, my grandfather got me a toy drum set from a garage sale for about $5.
Yeah.
And fell in love with drums immediately. And that became my primary instrument, and that I still play to this day. That was the beginnings of it.
And so what was the music like around the Haskin household then? What sort of stuff were your parents listening to? Were they musical?
A lot of 60s and 70s music, a lot of Motown.
Yeah.
Supremes, Four Tops, that kind of stuff, which I absolutely adore to this day.
Yeah.
It was great because it was simple. And, before progressive music really existed, it was just straightforward, great singing, great feeling songs. So I think I learned a lot about how music should feel, how you should get the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
What music should do for you. And then once I heard, once MTV came out, then it was all about, okay, now it's how crazy can we make it? What cool synth sounds do we have?
Yeah.
Really just expanded my world dramatically. And found Rainbow. They were Stone Cold was the big videos, because Straight Between the Eyes had come out, and fell in love with that album. They were the first band that I started getting their back catalog. Like, okay, what are all their albums? And we didn't have the internet back then, so it was like music books and resources,
and asking other people.
And asking people. And then from there, when they did the live concert, Live Between the Eyes in Texas on MTV, found out that Richie was in Deep Purple. So that was, then the floodgates really opened. And then it was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, King Crimson, Uriah Heep, all these other bands that came into play. And boy, I mean, that became my world after that.
A lot of English bands in there, hey?
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily not. So I don't think I've ever asked that before. Were Deep Purple and Rainbow, were they big over here? Like, I know Since You've Been Gone probably was a radio hit everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Were they big in North America?
Not as much as Europe, I don't think. When Deep Purple started out, they were huge in America and didn't take off in England very much at all.
Yeah.
Which is really weird. But Hush was a huge success over here in the States. But eventually they found their footing in Europe. Rainbow, I think they had already had a pretty solid following just with Richie Richie's fame from Purple. So they kind of started off well, and then with Ronnie James Dio and Man on the Silver Mountain,
Yeah.
right off the bat, I think they had some pretty decent success. But of course, once they went commercial on the Down to Earth album, that really helped with the radio play and
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
So you listen to all these things, like I said, Motown, that's a different skill set, especially as a drummer, right? Because
Oh yeah.
that's not four on the floor rock. You're getting some syncopation in there. There's some interesting things in there, some great players, and it's all those great session players, right? So you've got like, I don't know, 4 or 5 drummers who played on probably 19,000 of those Motown classics.
Right.
So how do you drift then into, did you sort of form bands at school or playing live? How did playing live kind of come into your life?
It was mostly just jams with my brother. He was a guitar player.
Okay.
For a long time. Our music tastes were incredibly parallel, so that made it really easy for, hey, let's do this song. Okay,
Yeah.
I like that song. There wasn't much need for compromise, so we just played whatever we wanted to, and it was everything from Purple and Rainbow to Jethro Tull to Uriah Heep to Zeppelin. All the fun stuff.
Yeah.
And but you're right about Motown, because it was a lot more Ringo than it was AC/DC, right? There was a lot more of that swing feel, not just exactly on the beat all the time, which I think greatly helped me, although I had no idea at the time what benefit I was getting out of it. I wouldn't until years later. But yeah, that's how it started. And then he and I did a concert at our high school for muscular dystrophy. That was like my big first live performance.
Cool.
And, heart beating in the throat. Oh my God, I can't do this, but I'm going to walk out there and do it anyway, kind of thing. And, you get a song or two in, and then you're fine. Then it's just rehearsal.
Yeah. You're just playing with your friend then, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
I've played 3 songs live my entire life, and it was the same thing. I was nervous as hell until I let us in. So as soon as I look over at Chris, he plays his first chord, everyone drops in. It's like, yeah, then now it's just muscle memory. I've done this 1,000 times. This is just fun. This is playing. Now I get why people do this, because this is fun.
It's an adrenaline rush like nothing else I can explain, because it really is its own unique thing. And I think especially as the drummer, because you're the foundation, you're the one that's keeping everybody on time and everyone together. And no one's really looking at you, because they're all looking at the singer or the guitar player anyway. So you can just kind of, be in your space and do what you do. It's a lot of fun. The trick to playing live as a drummer, though, is to really watch your count and tempo, because you're all excited.
Yeah.
You want to play at 1,000 miles an hour, no matter what it is, because you're just filled with the adrenaline. And so that's the big thing I caution drummers about when you start learning to play live, is really watch your tempos.
Growing up, my dad played in pretty popular draw sort of pub bands, just cover bands. And they used to do Line Eyes by the Eagle, which is 6.5 minutes, something like that. They got this 19-year-old drummer in. They used to rip through it in 4.5 minutes.
Oh my God.
Going double time, because they're like, slow down, Tony, for God's sake.
Yeah. Oh, sure. This needs a double bass part, doesn't it? but that's the trick. And that's why I don't like listening to live albums that much, because you're not there. You don't have the same energy and the adrenaline. So everything becomes out of context for me. There's some I like because I grew up with them, but as I've become a live player, I've really gotten away from listening to live music, just because I don't feel in touch with it.
I've always been exactly the same. There's a few exceptions, and the artist we're talking about tonight is definitely one of them. But what I find is, especially, obviously you're on a great podcast, Backtracks Aerosmith, with Corey Morissette and John Mariano. And I don't like Aerosmith live. Like, the recordings live, to me, it's all about, same with David Lee Roth in Van Halen, right? He's a performer. So when you take that performance element away and all you're left with is the voice, and it's not always great, you think, well, I don't know if I want to listen to this, because Tyler he's not a great live singer. I don't think all the time. Maybe he was back in the 70s, early 70s, and, into the early 80s. But I mean, some of the later stuff is like, oof, geez, that's rough.
Yeah, it really depends on the night or the moment, I should say. And a lot of that, I think, does have to do a lot with the drug use and the, exhaustion and all that. Because he's a good singer. He has the talent to do it. But I think there's a lot of stuff that gets in the way. Plus, I don't think they always get great live recordings either.
No.
But you're right. They're a very visual band. I mean, you could listen to Alice Cooper live, or you could experience Alice Cooper live. And I say experience as opposed to see, because it's a whole. Have you ever seen him?
I took my youngest daughter is an Alice Cooper fan, and we got 2 second row dead center when they came through Saskatoon with Nita Strauss and with it was, like you said, that's that's theater to me. That's Shakespeare. It's vaudeville.
Yeah.
It's throwing everything. It's throwing the kitchen sink at everything. The guy basically invented that style of performing, really, didn't he? From what I understand, it's
And
incredible.
I saw him the first time on Halloween night in Detroit, which was just, I mean, it was amazing. He pulled out all the stops.
Yeah,
But what gets me about him, and that you'll never get this on a record, is you really feel like everyone on his stage is a puppet that he's controlling.
yeah.
And there's nothing else like that. And you just don't get that on a live record. You can enjoy the music to an extent, but
Yeah.
you're not going to get the experience. Even if you watch it on video, it's not the same.
And that's where, anyway, I'll just throw in because it is a Tom Petty podcast. And that's one where
Yes.
they did. So Petty did they did a 20-night run at the Fillmore. So they did Wildflowers, and then did this album called Sounds of Music from She's the One, the movie. And it was sort of, because it was a soundtrack album, Tom didn't feel like it was really a full Heartbreakers album. So he wasn't sure if he wanted to tour it. And they were kind of getting a little bit tired of going out and just playing the greatest hit stuff. And they're on that sort of treadmill.
Yeah.
So they thought, you know what? If we go to San Francisco and we get 20 dates at the Fillmore, then what we can do is we can do, the 10, 12 songs from the greatest hits. We can do some of those, but then we can just have a lot of fun. And so they broke out in those 20 dates. They did something like 120 covers. And that's, they're doing Bo Diddley, and they're doing the Stones, and they're doing everybody. The Guess Who, or not the Guess Who, what's the name of the band? The Irish band. Oh, for the love of God, I can't remember the name. Anyway,
but they go out there. Would have been interesting though to hear that.
But they go back and they just, because that's their roots, right? They're those old rock and roll songs. And if you're a good band, all you need to know really is what key are we in, watch the leader. He's going to cue us in for the solos and the breaks and the bridge and everything. So there's that element of it being this kind of almost this free for all jam where, and this was released, last year. And Tom's been, so there's no overdubs there. That's just live off the board. So that one I like because it captures a real snapshot of what that band looked like at that moment in time. So it's not a one-night performance, but it's a snapshot of this band about where they are. So yeah,
I like that. And we get bands here in Vegas doing those residencies where they'll do a week or 2 weeks, or sometimes 3 or 4 weeks, and they really do get to experiment and play and do different things because they want people to come back, especially like us locals. If you're going to be here for a month, we can go see you, but give us a reason to come see you again.
Awesome. Okay, well, you know what? Let's dig into a little bit of Tom Petty. I'll tell people, I've kind of come up with this idea, and I threw it at Scott because I got this idea. Actually, I steal all my good ideas for podcasts, right? The guys from In the Lap of the Pods, which is a brilliant Queen podcast, they did a thing where they brought in 2 people. One was a friend, and the other guy, I don't know where they found him. I don't know if he was sort of an acquaintance or a friend of a friend, but they said they weren't Queen fans. And they said, we're going to give you 10 songs. We want you to record your thoughts on each song. And then they sort of did a reaction to that. So they would play back, this is the first song. This is what such and body said. This is what the other person said. And then they'll sort of comment on it. And I thought, that's a really good idea. I like that because there's going to be a lot of people around who, especially with Tom Petty, because he's such a big artist, especially in the States, that most people are going to know, I mean, I know that you said you don't know his work, but American Girl, Free Fall. And there's certain songs that right, they're just ubiquitous. Everyone knows those songs.
Sure.
But to dig into some of the other stuff, the non-hits or some of the deeper cuts with someone who I know who has a fantastic ear for music and can articulate what they think about it and what they see, and maybe be a little bit more critical than someone who's too close to it, I thought would be a fabulous idea. So I'm calling it the Petty 8 format because I gave Scott 8 songs. And what we thought we'd do is we'd go through them. Scott's going to tell me what he thought of each song. And then at the end, I'm going to get him to pick 3 that go onto an EP. And I'll put that somewhere. I'll put it in on Spotify as a playlist or something. But I'm also going to get him to take 1 song off my Petty 8, so that the next time I do this with someone, I'll have to pick a different song. So that's what we're going to do. So I gave you an 8-song set list, and this was hell to go through. I mean, I'm sure, like, if you think about doing this with Uriah Heep, you go, oh my God, where do I even start? Do I just do the entire first album?
Well,
you know what I mean?
What's the count of his original songs? Do you know what the total number is?
Oh my God. Well, let me look, because I've got my spreadsheet. It did 16. Well, they did 16 albums solo and with the Heartbreakers, 2 with Mudcrutch, which was the band that he reformed. That was his first band that he went and reformed after 40 some years and just went out and did small venues. Then there's the Traveling Wilburys, obviously, but then there's also all the other stuff that didn't make albums, sort of all the outtake stuff, which came out later. So if you just give me 1 second.
And that's the real trick, like all the outtakes and bonus tracks and, the song, this is the same song as something else, but it was titled something different. So it's not really a different track, but it is. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. I got 289 studio recorded songs.
Okay. Yeah.
which is it's a because I've told this story before, but I was sitting there and having a few drinks. Like, I should do a podcast because I'd done a podcast with my friend Randy
Mhm.
a couple of years right at the start of the pandemic, and we did 12, 13 episodes. We just couldn't get it off the ground, and we sort of we shelved it. But I
Yeah.
enjoy podcasts. I thought, well, I want to do this again. So I know I've got a completely original idea that no one's probably ever thought of before. I'll take an artist and I'll talk about one song at a time of their entire catalog, because that's a very original, very unique idea. And I'd been listening to a lot of Tom Petty and going back and listening to his back catalog. Well, that's one because I don't know the catalog that well.
Mhm.
I know there's 16 albums, and then I find out, oh my God, there's all these box sets, and then there's this band Mudcrutch. And it's like, okay, well, that's going to be, well, now it's 6.5 years just to get through the canon. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing with Uriah Heep is that they had a deluxe CD issued of just about every one of their back catalog.
Yeah.
So I was able to get all the bonus tracks and everything in one shot. And then there were a handful that were only released on like compilation albums or like a live album with a bonus track. And so hunting all that down was a little bit of a challenge, but
Yeah.
I think the count of original songs, I think came to 307 before the new album,
Right.
which just came out in January. But I've covered everything. I've got the last few episodes are coming out. I think June 8th will be the last one. And then I've covered
Right.
their entire catalog. So until they put out another album, that'll be that.
All right. Well, let's do some music critique, Scott.
Yeah. This is a Tom Petty podcast, right?
So what I did was I tried to pick 8 songs that would give you as broad a look at Tom Petty's sort of, the different looks of the band, and also give a little bit of chronology. I did put them in chronological order.
Okay.
There's 16 albums, so there's 8 songs, so there's a lot of albums missing. So I did make specific choices for specific reasons. So as we go through, I'll sort of maybe break down a little bit of that where I think that some of that's relevant. But okay, so the first song I gave you was from the debut album released in 1976. Produced by a guy called Denny Cordell, who gave the Heartbreakers. He actually signed Mudcrutch originally, but it wasn't working out. And he said, you know what? Not really interested in Mudcrutch anymore, but Tom Petty, this guy's got something. What about you as a solo artist? And the initial idea was that it would be Tom Petty as a solo artist with a whole bunch of session musicians for different songs. But Tom always wanted to be in a band. He's like, that's not for me. I don't want that. So he goes on back and gets most of Mudcrutch back, forms the Heartbreakers, and they go in and they record the first album. So Fooled Again, I Don't Like It is the track that I gave you off the debut album. So what were your thoughts on this one?
And I should say too, my experience with Tom Petty is I know a couple of the hits, and that's really about it. I think the first song I heard was probably Refugee.
Yeah.
And then I remember Free Falling, and there's probably a couple others I would know if I heard them.
Yeah.
But I'm more familiar actually with Tweeter and the Monkey Man from the Traveling Wilburys, which I absolutely love that song. Every time that came on, I'm like, I don't care what's going on, I gotta stop and listen to this song. It's so good. So Fooled Again, so what I did is I just took notes. I didn't read anything in the descriptions of what you sent me. I wanted to just be as going in blind and natural reaction as possible. I think that's always the best way to do it.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for.
The first thing that struck me is I thought I was listening to a variation of You're So Vain by Carly Simon.
Okay.
It had a feel like that in the riff at the beginning. The first impression I had when he started singing was he sounds like a bad impression of Mick Jagger.
Okay.
So there was just something about his enunciation in this song that I really was not on board with.
Okay.
And that made it a little bit difficult. But trying to set, when I hear something I don't like, I try and set it aside and just say, okay, well, what else is in the song that I may or may not like? I loved the strings. I thought that was such a great compliment and really important part of the song. I thought they were a little bit loud in the mix. And again, I don't know if this is the original mix, the remaster or what, but I thought they were just a little bit too loud. They were a really nice effect though. I think that brought out a lot of emotion. The mix overall was really good in general. I really liked that transition back into the main riff just before the 2-minute mark. I thought that was really smooth and very, very well done. His voice kind of ruined the song for me on this one because I just couldn't get into that weird articulation he was using, because I've heard him sing. I mean, he can sing very clearly and very well defined. So I knew that this was a stylistic choice, or maybe just the way he sang early on before somebody came along and said, don't do that anymore.
Well, this is the thing with, and it was another thing that I tried to do was pick different songs, because he was a chameleon with his voice, because he would often sing from character, right? A lot of singers do that. So he'd write from a position of a character rather than, you know, just a love song or something that he's saying. He would sing from a very specific point of view. And so that's his, and I'd written down, like, I'd made a few notes myself, just I wonder if Scott will pick up on this. And it's that choked, that very kind of tight throat delivery, right? Which he'll use here and there. And he does it on Refugee as well. There's bits on Refugee where he uses the same type of delivery, but he definitely doesn't do that throughout. It's definitely a sort of a creative decision to do it for that song. And I think with the tone of the song, Fooled Again, I don't like it. It's a very combative song, right? Like it's a very
very much
sort of thing. It's, you know, so I think that snarl and that drawl was intentional. So, but that's interesting that was sort of a black mark straight away. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with the concept. I just, this particular execution just ruined the song for me. But I also was keeping in mind too, that I have no context. So if any of these were, say, a part of a trilogy of songs, or if it was a concept album and there was a reason behind a stylistic choice, I had to just kind of put that out and say, I don't know. I can only listen to this as it's presented to me and say, here's what I like and here's what I don't like. I could see a lot of potential in the song. I think if I heard the song again with like a regular vocal on it, I would probably like it.
Okay, so we skip. So that's the first album. We skip 2 albums now. So You're Gonna Get It is the second album. This is where the producer Denny Cordell is sort of a bit absent, and that one, it's not a great album. Listen to Her Heart comes off that record, which is a brilliant song, very Birds-esque. And then Damn the Torpedoes, which is the big hit. That's Refugee, you know, Even the Losers. There's a lot of big hits off that record. So the next song I gave you was off Hard Promises, which is the 4th album from 1981, again produced by Jimmy Iovine. And this is where the band now, they've worked with Jimmy Iovine. Now they really understand how to make a record. Now they know how to make a cohesive album. And the song I gave you is Something Big.
Yes. The first note I have is that it was a really cool beat. As a drummer, I'm guessing that you probably feel the same way.
Oh, yeah.
I thought they picked a perfect tempo. I mean, a little bit faster or a little bit slower could have killed the song.
Yeah.
You know, and that is one of the biggest keys to songwriting, is finding that just perfect tempo for what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Or series of tempos, because the song can change tempos, I should say. I really like the intro, and I love that gentle organ in the verse. I thought that was a really nice touch. I thought without that, the song would have been very empty. And it wasn't loud. It wasn't predominant in the mix.
Yeah.
But it was necessary to really make that a full sounding song. Again, I didn't really like the vocals on this one. And this is why I think I've really never gotten into his music. And I'm not going to say this on every song, don't worry.
Okay.
But on this song, he sings like he doesn't even care about the story he's telling. And that's what I had a hard time with. I wasn't buying this was a reality to him. I very much felt like he's singing words that he wrote down on a piece of paper.
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
It felt like an early take, maybe like a run-through rehearsal, more so than a final vocal for me. But I'm also used to listening to singers that are very dynamic. I listen to a lot of folk music. So outside of a couple of albums and like Gordon Lightfoot, who really puts a lot of personality into his songs, Tom to me is a very straight delivery on a lot of stuff.
Okay.
And so when you're used to a more emotional delivery, this kind of stuff is a different angle, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not what I'm used to. So I'm used to more, you know, like a Reba McEntire emotional kind of vocal, you know. So I didn't really feel his vocal on this one. What I wrote down wasn't No Way to Live as a line that stood out, and there was something about the way he said the word live that just, I was like, oh God, no, don't do that. It just, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was just like, wow, that does not work.
Wow. Okay. So, because this is something that Petty does a lot. He bends vowels because he's got that southern drawl, but he doesn't really, you can hear it when he speaks sometimes, but it's very subdued. But sometimes he'll really lean into it in a song. And this is one where I think he does lean into that southern, because it's no way to live. Like he bends that eye. Like he doesn't sing it straight, right? So
yeah, it was a really weird sounding way to sing it. Like I can listen to Gwen Stefani say live and do that thing that just is like, wow, I can't believe you just did that. And there was just something about the way that he did the accent on it. I'm like, wow, that just it was almost like it was overdubbed on purpose that way, instead of just, it didn't feel natural. It wasn't because the way he was singing everything else, then all of a sudden he's got this heavy accent on one word is kind of, it just was off-putting to me. I thought the mix was fantastic. One thing I'll say consistently through these songs, for the most part, great studio mixes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, he worked with some great producers. So, and this is Jimmy Iovine, right? So Jimmy Iovine comes in. I can't remember which album he's just worked on. He's just worked. I think it was Born to Run, or he'd worked on some album, but he wasn't the producer. He was the engineer.
Mhm.
And so Damn the Torpedoes was his first really sort of big make or break. Well, I've got to make this album sound really good. And he just put the band through the ringer, making him do 70 takes of Refugee and just killing them in the
Jeez.
studio, right? So, but the
Mhm.
second album, so that's, but he's a producer. He knows, like he said, he knows how to get a good sound. He knows how to deal with
Yeah.
dynamics. He knows how to separate frequencies, all those things and things. So usually I would say the first two albums don't sound brilliant, but from then on, there's a lot of gravy. So.
But the other note I had on this one was I
Okay.
love the guitars and the drums and percussion. I think it's a very well crafted song.
Yeah.
I like this one. Yeah, I thought it was pretty good.
Well, I gave you this song for a specific reason because it's always,
Okay.
to me, it's always been very cinematic. It was
Mm,
Tom's, like, because Tom wrote lots of different types of songs, but this was the first story song that he really wrote from sort of a bit of a narrative, and it's quite loose, it's ambiguous. You don't really know exactly what's going on, but it
yeah.
gives you just enough to sort of put your own mental framework. And to me, it's always kind of sounded like a small town Nevada, like a Barstow or something like that. You could get that sense of just
Yeah.
some little dusty off the highway kind of town, and with
Hmm.
this mystique around it, with the neon, the motel lights not quite worked, so it's flashing and the oil's missing. That's what it's always
Right.
kind of.
Yeah.
That's what it's always conjured in my mind. So
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that. I think this song would actually play well in a place like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we skip another album. We don't do
Okay.
Long After Dark. So Jimmy Iovine does three. There's the Iovine trilogy, as I call it. So they do Damn the Torpedoes, Hard Promises, which is that was from, and then Long After Dark. So those are the three. Now he does come back in to do a bit of Southern accents, but I move on to Southern accents now because this was an album fraught with issues, which I
Okay.
don't think really come through on this song that I sent you. So the song that I gave you was Dogs on the Run. So in 1985, like I say, it was produced by Jimmy. Well, the album was produced by Jimmy Iovine, Tom Petty, Mike Campbell, Dave Stewart, Robbie Robertson. Like it was just a mess. But this song, I think, mostly was produced by Jimmy Iovine, and he came back in to clean up a few things that weren't quite working.
Okay. Okay. So this is where are we at? Dogs on the Run.
Dogs on the Run.
Great start. I really like the beginning of the song. The bass guitar sound is phenomenal. I really dug that and the groove.
Yeah.
I really like what he's playing and the way it sounds. Um, I do have a note, and I think this is my last dig at Tom's voice, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, yeah.
But I wrote, did he have oral surgery before singing this? It sounded like he had a mouthful of gauze. It was really a
Okay.
weird vocal sound. Um, it's funny, we were just talking about And Justice for All because the snare on this sounds kind of papery. It sounds kind of And Justice for All
Okay.
on it. Really could have worked better if it had more of a snap to it. It still has a snap, but it's like somebody's just taking a piece of paper and just like crinkling it up and smoothing it really quick, as opposed to like an actual stick attack on a drum head.
Yeah.
It's a really weird sound. I'm not quite sure how they got that, but they did. I think musically though, it's a really nice song. It just I was so glad that you said it had production issues on this album, because I do think it came through a little bit for me at least. I think a better drum sound could have made the song a little bit stronger, but I think the writing and the performance of it is good. But yeah, I do see some production issues there.
Yeah, and it was so Iovine does the first, like I said, he does Damn the Torpedoes, Hard Promises, Long After Dark. And Damn the Torpedoes really actually changed the way that drums were recorded, because Iovine really brought them up in the mix, and they were very big. They sounded like they were a huge part of the mix, and you could really hear them, where that wasn't really happening that much up to that point. I mean, you got Zepp and Bonham and that kind of stuff, but that was a bit different because they were massively reverb saturated, and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't quite the same thing, because this is more, people don't like the term, but pop rock, right? Because it's it's sort of radio friendly rock, whatever. So that wasn't really there. So it really is noticeable on Southern accents that drum sound isn't the same, especially in some of like the stuff that Dave Stewart did. Well, it's the guy in the Eurythmics. He writes like, he's writing electronic stuff. So of course that, Don't Come Around Here No More, it's going to sound completely different. So it lost its way a little bit, but I like too, though, I'll throw back at you that I like that you like the song as its base. And again, this has got another one of my absolute favorite Tom Petty lines in it. And it says, he said, honey, ain't it funny how a crowd gathers around anyone living life without a net?
I
It's
love
just a
that. Yeah.
brilliant
Yeah.
line,
And so true.
Yeah.
especially nowadays.
Yeah.
But I would say now we would have to add the caveat of anyone who seems to be living life without a neck, because everything's so fake and all
Yeah.
that now.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a good song. I do see some production issues with it. I would be curious if they did some kind of like a snare replacement,
Right.
where they go in and digitally replace the snare with a stronger sounding snare. But you couldn't have a guy like Bonham playing on a song like this. It would just drown out
Yeah.
everything. There's this kind of music really needs a lighter touch on the drums. But the snare still needs to be prominent and have a good snap to it and a good
Yeah.
bottom end. But it doesn't need to be a cracking John Bonham or Lars
Yeah.
Ulrich snare. It needs to have some presence, but not destroy everything around it. It's an interesting thing because this kind of music is actually harder to mix than people think.
Oh yeah.
Just because you're so used to putting the drums up in the mix and have them drive the song, and drums do not drive this music. Guitars and vocals drive this music. The drums are supportive. And this is a rare style of music where drums play a supportive instead of a lead role.
Yeah. And Stan Lynch, so Stan Lynch was the drummer at this point. So Stan Lynch ends up leaving later on, and then there's the rest of this, I think after this song, there's one. No, I think this might be the last song he drums on. But he leaves, and Stan Lynch was always kind of, people mislabel him as a power drummer. With Stan Lynch, he plays traditional grip, not match grip for starters, which most, Bonham played match grip when he played most of his Zeppelin stuff.
Right.
So Bonham's a power drummer. Keith Moon's a power drummer.
Yeah.
Stan Lynch isn't. He can hit the drums as hard as anyone, but he's quite a finesse drummer. And he does a lot more. It's the same thing, when as a drummer, when you sit and you think, well, I can play this. This sounds easy. And then when you actually sit and you think, oh shit, actually, I can't quite get that. How's he doing that? There's a weird little swing there that I can't quite find. I don't know how he's doing that. And it's super frustrating, especially if it's simple or it sounds simple.
Yeah.
And Stan Lynch is one of those drummers where when I sit down and I can play the notes most of the time, but I'm not quite getting that accent, how he's doing it. So, yeah. Okay, so Southern Accents. Again, we skip the next album, Let Me Have One. So Southern Accents took 18 months. Tom actually punched a wall in frustration because he couldn't get so what he'd done is they've been trying to get the song called Rebels. They've been trying to get the mix right, and they've been trying to record it, and they've been over and over and over again. And Tom had gone back and listened to his demo, realized that his demo was still better than the track that they had after like 4 weeks, and punches a wall in frustration, pulverizes all the bones in his left hand. The doctors say, you might not be able to play guitar again. We don't know. Like, we'll see what happens. So he's away and he rehabs, and there's a lot of cocaine around in the recording his house. So it's a mess. This album's a mess, and it takes 18 months to get over the line. The next album they do, they decide, well, f that, we're not doing that again. What we're going to do is we're going to play a lot of this live off the floor. We're not going to bring an outside producer. There's going to be no groupies. There's going to be nothing. No outside influence. It's just 5 guys making a record, done. So they do that. They get out of that phase. There's some highlights in the album. There's some stuff that's not great. Then Tom meets up with George Harrison, Roy Orbison, Jeff Lynne, and Bob Dylan. Well, actually, the Heartbreakers were Dylan's backing band, so we knew Bob Dylan. But then they form the Wilburys, right? So they record the Traveling Wilburys Volume 1. And Tom thinks, you know what I need is, I just need Jeff Lynne. And you know what? I think that most artists in the world at some point in their lives have thought, I think I need Jeff Lynne, right? Because he's just so good. Right, so they need Jeff Lynne. Let's come in and we'll get this simpler. We'll make this simpler. So Tom decides, I'm going to go do this solo album, which the rest of the band doesn't love, right? Because obviously, they're a band, they're a going concern, they're pretty famous, they're doing quite well, they're selling out tours and everything else. So Tom goes away and they record Full Moon Fever. So the song that I gave you was the Apartment song from Full Moon Fever. So that was 1989. It's the 8th album that Tom recorded overall, produced by Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty and Mike Campbell. But
I'm a big fan of getting away from your band and doing side projects. I often say, if you're in a group and for people who have never been in a band, it's a family. You're touring together, you're in the studio together, like you spend more time with your bandmates than you do your actual family,
of course.
And but you're only going to grow together to a certain point. It's like you're in a fish tank. You're only going to grow to your proportion of the size of the tank, right? You've got to get in a different tank with other things and learn to grow and forage for food differently. And you're going to come back with not only fresh energy, but you're going to come back with new insight, new experiences, and new way of doing things. I think they're so vital. And that's 100%. Why bands like Deep Purple, who, they had these different side projects, and that's why it works.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they were worked to death and kind of destroyed the band, but those things really do make a difference. So I'm a big fan of that. As far as the apartment song goes, the first thing that I said was it was nice and upbeat. I love the tempo of it. It feels like this is the song that I noted that it felt like when country was starting to cross into pop.
Yeah.
Really had that kind of air to it. And I don't mind that at all. I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm just
Yeah,
as
for sure.
as an observation. I did say that his voice is pretty good on this one. And the criticism I have is that the song seems like it just was over too fast. I was enjoying it, and when it was over, I'm like, holy crap, that just the whole song just went by. It was and that's a sign of a good song.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like when I know I use a lot of analogies, but like when I go to a movie theater and I all of a sudden halfway through the movie or at some point go, whoa, I'm in a movie theater. I can see the edges of the screen and I realize I'm a physical being inside of a public area. And that's when they've lost me a little bit.
Right.
And then they have to work. And sometimes that's intentional. Filmmakers want to give you a break to, before the big push. But this song was just over so quick. I never thought about anything else. My mind didn't go, okay, as soon as this is done, I got to do this, or how many more songs do I have, or whatever. It was, what am I going to say even? It was just the song's over. And that is a sign of a really good song to me.
And it's fun. It's a fun catch song. And I love so this was actually recorded for the Southern Accents sessions. So it was 2 albums back of this one, but it was discarded. So there is a version of the song from that era, which is different from this one because it's not got Jeff Lynne's production and it doesn't have that big drum fill in the middle, the Peggy Sue thing, right? Which when those toms come to, you're like, oh, this is just great because I love Buddy Holly. So the first time I heard them, I'm like, I know what this is. I can latch onto this. Is exactly what I'm here. And again, it comes off the back of that Wilburys album where that was just about 5 guys writing songs just because they enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
No, it happens that it ended up being a very big commercial success, but that definitely wasn't the reason that they did it. And I think that this song is one of those throwbacks to, Jeff Lynne probably said to Tom, have you got anything else we could use? We've written, 9, 10 songs. Have you got anything else laying around? Maybe play this one. And Jeff Lynne saying, oh man, totally, we got to do this. That's just going to be fun. Let's do that one.
But don't you think that's part of why it becomes successful? Because it's not written geared up to make it on the radio. It's not like the record company says, hey, we need one more hit on this album. Yeah. It's, I like this riff. Let's do something fun with it. And when you write music honestly like that, I think the audience feels whether it's honest or not. I really do believe that. And I think that's why so much of the music in the 70s was so popular, partially because we only had so much music in the 70s, but also because it was honest music. I mean, when you listen to songs that start and stop, the bands they're not 100% together all the time. Like now, all that stuff would be cleaned up. It would be all perfected. Let's take all the humanity out of it and just write technically perfect song or just record technically perfect songs. I think songs that have that natural, we're doing this because we're enjoying it. You feel that. You feel it in the solos. You feel it in the way the riff is played. You feel it in the vocals. You feel it in the drum beat because it does have a little bit of a not right on the beat kind of thing. That's why those songs are popular. They're good. The band enjoyed them and people will enjoy them, but I think that's why they become successful.
It gives them personality. The biggest example I always go back to this is when you listen to Babbo O'Reilly by The Who, Keith Moon comes in about 10 beats per minute too fast. It's insane how fast he comes in.
But good stuff. The apartment song, I'm a big fan of that one.
When I noted too that the funny thing is that I think that he was talking about the vocal, that's Tom's natural voice, where he's not playing a character. He's not affecting his voice for a specific reason. That's Tom's. If he's just singing in the shower, that's Tom Petty's singing voice. And it comes across that again, I think that's part of the reason why it's so, the word charming springs to mind. There's so much charm in that song because it just sounds like someone singing a song just for the fun of it. Happens to be on a multi-platinum record, but who the hell cares about that,
again,
right?
It's being very natural, being honest, not trying to do something. Just this is what we did.
Yeah. Okay, so we skip over the next album, which is Into the Great Wide Open, where Jeff Lynne produces this album, but it's the Heartbreakers now, and Tom sort of forces Jeff Lynne on the Heartbreakers a little bit, and it causes a little bit of tension, and Stan Lynch ends up leaving during the recording of the next album, which is Wildflowers, which to my mind, is one of the greatest achievements in popular music or rock and roll history. And if I were to recommend you to go and listen to a Tom Petty album front to back, that's the one definitely to go with. The song I gave you was Crawling Back to You, because I thought that dynamically it's a big change now from everything else I've given to this point. And I wanted to show you that Tom could write a ballad. So so this was again 1994, and it's produced by Rick Rubin. So Rick Rubin's a young producer. He's he's DMCs. He's done rap albums and all this kind of stuff. But he's 34 when he produces this record. He's never worked with a big rock act before, so it doesn't look like a marriage made in heaven from the outset. But when you listen to the production on this record, it's off the charts. So,
before I give my notes on this one, I just want to say, because that's a really interesting point that you bring up. And I remember, Roger Glover, the bass player for Deep Purple and one of Rainbow's players, has a lot of producing experience. I mean, he worked with Nazareth, he worked with all kinds of people. And he said it doesn't really matter what you're producing, because it's the same job. Whether you're producing folk music, rock music, metal, it really doesn't matter. It's what's going to make a good song. I say the caveat would be understanding the genre, so you know how it should sound and what it needs, because otherwise, how can you comment on it or give feedback? But it doesn't surprise me. I mean, even if you're like an R&B producer or hip hop producer, you still get how rock music works or folk music, because it's structure, and what feels good. And you can always tell what feels good and what doesn't, Crawling Back to You, I like this one. The first thing is I really like the opening. I thought it was very beautifully done. The guitar has just enough distortion to be noticeable, but not anywhere near enough to make it sound like a rock song, which I really liked. And that could be a fine line sometimes. There's just the right hint of it, to keep it in that element.
I'm so glad you picked up on that, because that was one of the notes. I was like, how cool does this guitar sound? Because Mike Campbell is a great guitarist. And again, one of those guys who just plays for the song. He has no ego about it. He doesn't, and he can shred, but he doesn't. He just thinks, this is what I need to play here,
And he's a very patient player, because when you're playing this kind of music, you have to know not to rush. You have to be able to keep your tempo. And as a guitar player, you have a tendency to, I'm only playing 4 notes here, I need to throw in 5 or 16 more, and he really knows how to lay back and play for the song. He absolutely does. I really like the change in feel when the drums kick in. I thought that was a great unexpected transition. Very, very well crafted. I put the hi-hat work. I really like the hi-hat work on this song. I'm sure as a drummer, you could probably appreciate the way he's playing it, because it really has a unique feel to it.
The guy they bring. So again, a little bit of background on that, because we're drummers, and we can nerd out on drums. So Stan Lynch decides that he doesn't want to do this. He doesn't like the direction that this album's taken. He's just not, and that's fine. Like, people creatively, you've got to be vested in it. So Tom says, okay, well, if you're not on board, then I kind of need someone who is. So they not audition, but they kind of do. So the story is that Steve Ferroni, who he's the drummer from the Average White Band, a Scottish funk band from sort of the 70s, and a session drummer, like a mad session drummer. He's played with everyone. So he pulls up and starts getting his tech is bringing his drums out as Kenny Aronoff is coming out of the building.
Oh, geez.
And he doesn't know who he's coming in to play with, because it's a bit hush hush, whatever. So he's like, so Kenny's not good enough. Oh, this is going to be, I don't know who's in here. And sits down, and the first thing they play is You Don't Know How It Feels. And it's a really simple beat, but straight away, Tom looks over and he's like, this guy gets this song. This guy knows where the bones of this song are, and it's the same thing with this one. And Steve Ferroni is brilliant on the cymbals. He said, there's the last song that I gave you. I think we'll talk a little bit about cymbals there, because it's just, he's so deft. It's so good, and then so delicate around the cymbals and on the hi-hats in this. So I'm again super glad you picked up on that. So cool.
And I'll say as a side note for any of you non-drummers out there who are wondering what the hell we're talking about, if you want a great visual reference, I always refer people to listen or to watch a live performance of the Beatles playing Love Me Do. It has the swing feel, but you can actually see the way Ringo's playing.
You can see his shoulders.
Exactly. That's the best visual representation, because most of the drummers, they'll do it with their wrist and you don't really get to see it so much, but he's moving in that. He's really physically representing what he's playing. So go watch that, because it's a great representation. Is there the slightest touch of flange on Tom's voice? I thought I heard just a smidge in there.
You know what? I'm not sure.
And I think it might have just been during just during the verse was what my note was.
Could well be, because, and I think again, it's everything about this song is restrained, right? Like, it's like you said, the guitars are held back, the piano part's beautiful, but it's very you know, because again, Ben Montench can play, like he can do, you know, what do they call, like stomp piano. He can do boogie woogie. He can rip your face off, but he can also
Yeah.
play those nice, gentle little pieces. The drums are nice and steady, mics and things.
Mhm.
But Tom's also, it's very calm. It's a very peaceful song.
Right.
And then it's got that beautiful, and again, this is one of the, I'd say this is probably one of the two or three favorite lines in the canon for all Tom Petty fans. Is when he says, "I'm so tired of being tired. Sure as night will follow day." And then, so Steve Ferroni, the drummer, now has this tattooed on his arm. Most things I worry about never happen anyway. Again, it's
Ah,
just one of those little throwaway lines that you think you would go, well, if you'd written that, you write it down and you kind of don't think, oh man, that's a great line. But you come back to think when you're doing your edits, they're like, oh no, that's a good line. That's
yeah.
I can write a whole song around that, you know.
Right. Yeah. There's a line that reminds me of called and it goes, how can I ever miss you if you never go away? Like that's
Oh,
so
who
true.
is that?
That's Purple.
Yes, of course it is. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
but that's so and that is so on par with society today. I
Yeah.
see all the time people on social media, and I really don't look at my feed a whole lot, but when I'm looking for certain things, you see posts and things, and I
Yeah.
see so many people worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen with this. I hope this goes well. Why don't you just like not build up anxiety, and maybe it'll go a lot better if you don't?
Let's wait and see. Let's take a wait and
Yeah,
see attitude. Yeah.
whatever's going to happen is going to happen. There's no point in worrying about it. I mean, if you're on murder trial or something, I could kind of see maybe having a little anxiety, but
Yeah.
for most things in life, this line is absolutely apropos. Let's see, what else did I say? So the vocals are slightly loud for me in this mix. I think they could have
Okay.
backed them off a little bit and it would have blended a little bit better. The backing vocals though are superb. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed the blend of the backing vocals. I really like the chorus and the piano. I think that's some great performance there. I really feel it. I really feel that playing. And as someone who plays a keyboard, I get it.
Yeah.
I know what it's like to have that feeling come through my fingers while I'm playing something that feels good to play.
Yeah.
To the point where I'll play it too many times. The guitar solo is pretty good, but I thought it was a little buried in the mix. I
Yeah.
thought, boy, that should be featured a little bit more.
Okay.
Again, not a whole lot, but just raise it up a little bit because I
Yeah.
think there's some great playing in there that doesn't really get featured.
Okay.
And to me, and the way I mix as an audio engineer is that your solo replaces your vocal.
Mhm.
So whatever volume your vocal is at, that's where your solo should be because it's covering, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you have like screechy guitars or something like that, then you have to back some of that off. But in general, you're basically compensating for the vocal that isn't there.
Yeah.
So I thought a little bit more in the mix, especially because we have an overloud vocal. It makes the guitar solo even quieter.
Okay.
You know. What else do I have here? After the solo, the song gets soft. That's where the vocals like really stand out. And I was just doing a review of a classical album of 80s remakes.
Okay.
And we have vocalists singing in the 80s style with synthesizers and electronic drums, but with an orchestra backing them up. It's a really interesting thing.
Oh.
But the problem is because the orchestra, especially the strings and the brass, they get so loud that the vocals are loud when the song is quiet. When the orchestra kicks in, they're right. Then when the brass kicks in, it's like too quiet.
Okay.
And then they drop out and the vocals are too loud. It is
Yeah, I see what
so
you're saying.
hard to mix that because you're not dealing with like a rock band or something that has a constant amount of sound. There's always a drum beat, there's always an organ, there's always a bass guitar. It's really easy to find the sweet spot for everything. This music is so up and down. And I kind of felt like that with this song too, because it has hills and valleys more than the other songs I've heard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to blend that in without writing the vocal fader, which also just doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Unless
Yeah.
he's singing quieter, it doesn't work for the song. It sounds like you're riding the fader. So that's a little bit difficult for the engineer. Overall, I thought it was pretty good, but that's the comparison I could make. I think the song could have been about a minute less.
Okay.
I think it was a lot of just too much
Okay.
of a good thing. I really did like the flute at the end, though. I didn't hear flute throughout the song. I just heard it at the end. I'm like, oh, where did that come from? That was kind of nice stuff. But I feel like there's a little bit of that in some of the other songs. Like all of a sudden, there's a little bit of harmonica that just kind of says, "Hey, I'm in the room too," and now I'm leaving. Like it's kind of weird. It's not like there's a harmonica in this song. It's like
I know what
there's
you
a
mean. Yeah.
harmonica in this part.
Well, and I think that the flute, actually is, I think that's a Mellotron.
Oh,
I
it
think
could
it's Ben
be.
Mont playing a Mellotron. I think. I'd have to
Yeah.
go back and check that, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't think there's a flute on that. Well, it's funny because talking about film scoring, Michael Kamen did. So there are a few songs on this with full sort of strings on. Michael
Mhm.
Kamen comes in and does that, right? So
Oh, yeah.
super, super cool.
Mhm.
And yeah, I was going to ask you about the length too, because for me it works just because the intro is quite long.
Mhm.
The intro's before Tom starts singing, it's got to be about 45 seconds to a minute.
Yeah, I think
But like I
so.
said, so it's and it is quite a it's not purposeful, it's not quite the right word, but it's a very deliberate pacing to the song. So I
Mhm.
think it to me it requires a little bit more time. So it's like a wine, right? You gotta take the cork out and let it sit for a minute and let it breathe. Then we're gonna
Right.
pour it, then we're gonna smell it, then we're gonna taste it. So that's how it's always been to me. But again, this is I'm so happy. I think this format is going to work so well because this is exactly what I hoped would happen. I really hoped that we wouldn't go, yeah, I think that too. Yep, I think that too. I
Right.
was
Yeah.
like, great, someone's got a different opinion because, and again, especially because you are a producer and you are a sound engineer for the people, like having that ear where you would mix it differently because that's
Mhm.
again that's subjective as well, right? That's we were talking about from Deep Purple, the bass player,
Roger
who's name?
Glover.
Roger Glover. He's going to mix that differently to Rick Rubin, who's going to
Yeah.
mix it differently to Jimmy Iovine. The same song, you're going to get 12 different mixes from 12 different producers,
Right.
which is a cool thing, right? It
And
changes
after you fire Bob Rock, then you go to,
after
yeah.
you fire.
But it's interesting. I think it was on the first song or one of the first songs that I reviewed from Uriah Heep from their first album. I think it was during like near the end of the solo or something. I can't remember now, but there was like a little clink I heard in there. And I'm like, that doesn't fit the song. What the hell is that? So I reached out to, so I had mentioned it in the episode that I was hearing some weird sound. It sounded like a coffee cup or something. And I wrote to Mick, I'm like, hey, what is this? Do you know? And he's like, apparently they were getting ready to sing the backup vocals and the drummer or somebody in the band was drinking coffee and they just set it down and you heard the clink of that in the actual recording. They like went too fast and because normally you would just set it down very gently and quietly
Yeah.
so that it wouldn't pick up on the mic, but it was just he needed to move it quick and he just set it down and it got on the mic. And I'm like, wow, yes, but as an engineer, I mean, that's my job is to hear every little
Yeah.
nuance. But I think it was more towards the end of it. I felt like the last
Okay.
minute or so, I'm like, this has kind of gone on long enough. Like I think you're not doing anything new or interesting with the song.
Okay. I get that.
And
Yep.
that's kind of where I felt like you're doing this big build. I expected the whole song to continue on to a build, but like once it flatlined, I'm like, okay. And then it just stayed there. I'm like, yeah,
Okay.
that's a little too long for me. But I did like the flute at the end. I thought that was whether it was a Mellotron or I thought it
Yeah.
was a nice touch, that sound. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So we skip now to, well, we skip 3 albums now.
Okay.
So Rick Rubin does 3 albums. Tom likes threes. He did 3 albums with Iovine. He did 3 albums with Jeff Lynne, 3 albums with Rick Rubin. So we're going to skip She's the One. Again, it's a soundtrack. There's some great songs on there. Echo, which is a really beautiful record, but it's like, when an artist writes a song like this was basically Tom was having real issues in his marriage during this period. And his kids say when they heard this record, they thought, oh, mom and dad are going to break up because they knew there's enough in it that you think, oh yeah, this is the sign that things are not right. Echo was really sort of, there was no subtlety about it. It was like, my heart is broken. I'm going to write all these songs about why that is, what I'm going to do to repair it, where I'm at right now, and then blah blah blah. The next album after that is The Last DJ, which is a phenomenal album. This is a major release criticizing, I mean, slamming the music industry, taking it apart and saying that this is bullshit. All you want is some little girl with a short skirt to sexualize and play guitar on stage, and and the line is, she gets to be famous, I get to be rich. So it's a very cynical album. After that, then he goes back and he wants to work with Jeff Lynne again, and he writes another solo album, Highway Companion, released in 2006. It's the last solo album that he does, and the song that I gave you off this album was Saving Grace.
Okay, so this is on the solo album.
Yeah, this is another solo album. Yeah.
Okay. I really like the pulse of the song that's created by the guitar and bass. I thought that was really different from the stuff that I'd heard from him before.
Yeah.
Was not expecting that at all. I mean, this feels almost a little bit more like something that you would get in a movie when they're trying to build a little bit of tension.
Yeah.
I could definitely see this song being licensed for a movie, whether it was an instrumental version or not.
For sure.
I don't normally like claps, but I thought they fit in very well to
Yeah.
that pulse. I thought that was a nice addition, because they're put in the mix in a space where they're not sticking out. They're not like, oh my God, that's claps. I'm constantly hearing claps.
Right.
They're buried enough for me to notice them, but not, hear too much of them. So kudos to the engineer on that. The verse reminded me a lot of Green Onions, if you know that song.
Yes, of course.
Definitely felt that. And I was kind of like, okay, well, maybe, again, no context. So maybe this was a little bit of an homage to it or something. I wasn't sure. But I love the shuffle feel of this
Yeah.
piece. It has such a great groove to it. That was the thing I think that caught me more than anything else, was just the feel. And of course, you and I are drummers, so we're going to
Yeah.
pick up on that
Of course.
more. But I thought that was great. That whoever made that choice absolutely made this song what it is. I really like the organ. Again, not overpowering anything present, but not dominating, which I thought was very important. There was some really nice performances in there, though. There was a change around 2 minutes, and then some steel guitar accents that I really liked. Both of those things very well. And my last note is then builds with the piano in the next verse. I really like that. So after that 2 minute change in the steel guitar accents, there was that build with the piano, and I really dug that. I thought that was this song was masterfully crafted, is what I would say.
Beautiful, and it's because it is that it's the turnaround. It's where the song breaks and then we come back in, right? And it's so, and the Green Onions thing is again, because I wrote my note, it was Green Onions inspired Southern rock riff and Lagrange. It's got that ZZ Top swing to it as well, right? You got that the shuffle is it's all that's Frank Beard. Now the cool thing about this album is so Full Moon Fever is a solo album, but I think Jim Keltner plays on one song, George Harrison and Bob Dylan provide backing vocals. Like it's a big family atmosphere. Mike Campbell and Ben Montench. So there's a lot of heartbreakers on it, and it's a lot of people in it.
Right.
Wildflowers really is a heartbreakers record musically because that's the people who played on the record. With a few, Ringo plays drums on a song, and there's a couple of other people pop in. This one is 3 people. It's Tom Petty, Mike Campbell, Jeff Lynne. That's it. Tom Petty writes all the songs. It's the only album release where there were no co-writes. He wrote all the songs, and he plays drums. So Tom Petty's playing the drums on this one, which
interesting.
When I found that, I was like, that blew my mind. Except, first of all, I didn't know. Well, Tom Petty started as a bass player. Well, he was the bass player in Mudcrutch. So he plays bass. We all know he plays bass, but I didn't know he could drum. And there's nothing super technical on it, but it's like you said, to get that swing and that feel and that specific timing and that cadence of it, it's pretty cool.
Well, it takes a certain syncopation to be able to do that, and I'm really impressed. I had absolutely no idea that he ever got behind a kit, let alone could pull off something like that.
Yeah,
I mean, and didn't I say that whoever did the drums, I meant to tell you earlier. You were talking about the grip. You know who else played with a traditional grip was Cozy Powell.
Oh yeah, but Cozy's like, again, you're into Ginger Baker level, God level of drummers now, right?
Right. So, yeah. There is a great video. I don't know if I sent it to you, but a great video of him teaching a kid how to play the opening to Stargazer.
No.
Oh yeah, I'll find it and send it to you. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, but no, this was a really good song. I have to say, I was very impressed with it. I think it had a great feel. There's really nothing I would change or say, yeah, this could have been done better. I mean, the mix is great. The feeling you get, and maybe you know what? Sometimes maybe consolidating the number of people that play on a song can really be beneficial because you don't have too many people adding their own unique flavors. You have 3 flavors that are adding different parts, but with that same feel in mind, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I don't know how much you know about Jeff Lynne, because Jeff Lynne's not much. Yeah, and Jeff Lynne, I mean, ELO, phenomenal band. Like he's worked with almost everyone on the bloody planet. But Jeff Lynne's thing is, I don't want a big, massive, lavish studio. I just want a nice small. So most of Full Moon Fever, which was again a huge free fall and a huge hit, most of that was recorded in Mike Campbell's bedroom, and they had the mixing board in the kitchen, and it was just in his house. And this was another one where they sort of get a small space. Exactly that. Let's get the 3 of us around the table. Let's get our acoustic guitars out. We'll figure out the songs. Tom shows what it is, shows the chord changes. We'll figure everything out, and then we'll start thinking about, okay, well, what needs harmonica, what needs bass, what needs blah blah blah. And so it's got that very organic, natural feel to it.
But see, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But this kind of music doesn't require a big studio. In fact, I think it would be damaging. You know, okay, so if you take the Traveling Wilburys, I could see that. You're talking bigger production, timpani is brought in, you've got, a much larger sound. for this kind of music, honestly, a small 16-track studio, maybe 32-track studio, if
Yeah.
you doing overdubs or whatever, you don't need much. You need natural. That's what makes this music work, is natural sound. And if you're in a huge room playing a little acoustic guitar and a vocal, that doesn't make sense.
Well, and I think the other thing that that does too is, and we're going to talk about this lots on the next song, actually, which obviously
Okay.
you won't have context for that, but when you record in a small space with not all the bells and whistles, it forces, first of all, it forces economy. You've got to be a little bit more selective about what you are going to include and what you're not. It
Right.
also means that you got to go in knowing the bloody parts.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be able to play the damn thing because you don't have, you don't have like Pro Tools. You don't have, well, which they didn't have back then. Well, when did Pro Tools come in? Or Cakewalk?
I started on
Mid-90s?
Cakewalk in 98, I think, and
Okay,
that was
yeah.
version 4.2. So
So we're
it had
doing
been
about
around
mid
for a couple
90s ish,
years at
right?
least. Yeah, I
Yeah.
would say. Yeah.
That is actually now a good segue into the next song, though, because that is not what happens on this one. So are we skipping it? We're not skipping an album this time. I'm going straight into Mojo from 2010. This is the penultimate album that the Heartbreakers record, with a guy named Ryan Ulyadi as the sort of the outside producer. Tom Petty and Mike Campbell were co-producers. Well, Petty was co-producer on everything from the second album. Mike is co-producer on everything from the fourth or fifth. But this one's Ryan Ulyadi, and I'll give you a little bit of background on this after we talk about it.
Okay.
So give me your thoughts
Ah,
on Jefferson Jericho Blues.
it's definitely an intriguing title. I had no idea. Like I couldn't even have a preconceived notion of what this song would be based on that title. Because a lot of people put blues in the title and it's not a blues.
Yeah.
So I wasn't even going to assume that.
Well,
But I did think,
Dylan wrote a
oh,
million blues songs that weren't
yeah,
blues songs. So.
exactly. But I did think the title was intriguing. I do like a good shuffle. I'm a big fan of those. I think even on rock albums, it's always good to have a shuffle on
Yeah.
a rock album. You're right. He was huge into shuffles. In fact, the double shuffle was something that they do quite a bit.
Yeah.
Very tricky to play. I did a horrible video on how to do it. And then their drummer, like 3 days later, posted a video on how to do it 1,000 times better than I could. But he does it for a living. I don't. So that's fair. But yeah, I like the shuffle. I really like the riff, but I did feel it was a little repetitive.
Okay. Yeah.
Kind of wanted a little more change. I did like the change around 1 minute and 45 seconds. And the guitar solo I thought was great. I thought the piano playing was great. As a drummer, this would be a fun song to play, I think, as a musician. I could get into this, and
Totally.
I could take this song into like a 10-minute jam as a drummer and be perfectly happy. But listening to it, I would have liked a little bit more change in it, just because I thought it was a little repetitive. But I thought it was a good song. It was one I definitely would put on my I like this list.
And it's funny that you say that, because I'll give you some of the background on this.
Okay.
So Mojo, again, Tom decides to do things a little bit differently. So at this point, the Heartbreakers, again, they're a big, it's a business now as much as anything, right? So of course, when you're a touring band and you've got a million guitars and amps and all kinds of shit, you need a place to put it. They've got this place called the Clubhouse in LA. I think it's in LA or just on the suburbs or whatever. And so this is where all this stuff is. And this is the band room, essentially, right? This is where they go to rehearse before tours. It's where they go hang out if they want to go jam ideas and things. So they decide that what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Clubhouse, and that's where we're going to record this next album. We're going to bring Ryan Ulyadi in, who I think at that point maybe had worked on one of the compilation albums, 1996 Playback, I think maybe. He's been brought into the Petty family. So the next thing they think is, okay, well, what else can we do differently? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to record this basically live. Basically, this is going to be live off the floor, and we'll get as much separation sound as we can. I mean, obviously, as a studio guy, you know this. You can put baffles up and things and whatnot. But essentially, so this entire album, there's probably about 6 or 7 overdubs on it total. The rest of it is just 6 guys in a room. Now, this is the other thing. They've gone from 5 guys now to 6. So during Echo, I think they bring in Scott Thurston as a touring musician. So Scott Thurston, of course, was one of the Stooges. He was Iggy Pop's lead guitarist, I think, back in the late 70s, early 80s. So Scott Thurston comes in now. This guy's a demon. He can play rhythm guitar, he can play lead guitar, he can play keyboard, he can play a mean harmonica, and that harmonica that you're hearing, that's Scott Thurston.
Okay.
So this is basically Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers going back in and doing a blues album, more or less. There's a few not quite bluesy songs on there, but it's more a blues album, and it's all live off the floor. So you get that this is where I think that fun thing really comes across, is Yeah, this is the drummers like Steve Ferrone is just having a whale of a time here because this is just fun to play.
Right.
Super fun to
Yeah.
play.
Now this was where they were storing their gear and rehearsing, but was it a recording? Was it set up as a recording studio or did they bring in
Nope.
a mobile?
Nope, they brought in just enough equipment to get, and they would have put some baffles in the corners and
Yeah.
they would have done some treatment of the room for sure,
Right. Because
but no,
the
it wasn't a
sound
recording
on
space.
this, yeah, the sound on this is really good. It feels
Yeah.
really natural. And that explains why, because it wasn't a padded studio. That when you walk
Yeah.
into a studio, when you're in the recording rooms, you feel the air is not really moving. It's a very
Right.
dense, very weird, surreal until you get used to it.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of bands, like, they'll go in and hang out in the recording room before they start playing. They'll kind of adjust and acclimate to the room a little bit.
Yeah.
Very important. But yeah, I do like the sound on it. I think they captured something very natural. But if it was all done live, that makes a lot of sense to me because it really felt like they were playing together.
Yeah.
Not like, okay, we're going to record the drummer and everybody else is going to do a scratch track. Then we're going to go in and do the bass and then we're going to come back and do the guitars. I really feel it was more recorded together as a live unit. So that really that tracks for me.
Awesome. And it's funny because I'd written down in my little sort of notes to talk to you about Backtracks Aerosmith.
Mhm.
You've done a couple of songs, I think now, maybe one or two from Honkin' on Bobo.
Mhm.
This is how they should have recorded Honkin' on Bobo. I think had they
Mm.
done it this way and it wasn't with the big studio production and it feels glossy and big, if they'd gone back to just really recording a band playing together, a lot of those songs would have popped a lot better. And that's why one of the reasons I really love this album is because throughout it just feels like a bunch of really talented musicians who are very, very well rehearsed playing a bunch of songs.
I'll go you one better and say I think all their stuff should have been recorded that way. They had songs that were kind of heavier. I mean, you look at a song like Ragdoll or Love in an
Yep.
Elevator or something like that. They're good rock tunes, but most of their music is sitting on a porch, hanging out, drinking beers, having a good time,
Yeah.
jamming. And I really think that a band like that could easily be overproduced and just you want to take the natural sound that they have and capture it.
Yeah.
And like doing this with a song like this and a band that does this kind of music, this just makes so much more sense not to be at Ocean Way Studios or let's go to Abbey Road. You
Yeah.
don't need that. You just need something that can capture the warmth and the magic of what you've got. And it's just too easy, especially when you've got a budget to overproduce the kind of stuff that it just doesn't work.
Well, I'm sure you would agree that I've talked to my friend Randy, who's also a producer and an engineer and everything. I always say, so people say, well, what's the most important thing? Is it the quality of the microphones? Is it the making sure that the position of the room, the bathroom, and what is it? Is it the engineers? And it says no, it's the players. If the guys come in being able to play the song, everything else is not. It's relatively easy. If you can't play, I got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what you're playing too, I mean, the education and the preparedness.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of songs are written in the studio and then just recorded right after that. Like, okay, we wrote it, now let's just get a take of it. The Beatles used to do that all the time.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, really, if you're an engineer, if you're working in a recording studio that's going to have a band like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers pay you to do theirs, if you don't know how to place a mic, you're never working on another album. Like they're not hiring inexperienced people. So yeah, you have to have those components, but those are kind of a given, to be honest. It's just like saying you're not doing a sci-fi movie that's going direct to DVD without some cheesy computer generated effects. Like there are certain things that you just know are going to happen. So I would say the engineer is a very important component, more on the mixing side than the recording, because getting a good recording to me is a given. That's not even anything that should be an issue unless you're recording something weird. Like they bring in some weird thing, like we need this vacuum cleaner recorded for the intro of a song.
Yeah.
Then I could see it a little trial and error. But to record a band like the Heart, that should not even be an element. Where the engineer becomes important is the mixing.
Yeah.
And maybe even you're a little off key or you're a little out of tune, like being aware of what's going on. But apart from that, no, the band's performance and getting a good sound isn't an issue anymore.
Okay, so on to the last song then. We're moving one album. So this is the last album that Heartbreakers release in 2014. Again, it's produced by Ryan Oliadi. And the song I gave you, which is one of my favorite songs in the Heartbreakers catalog, is Fault Lines.
Okay, so with this one, the first thing right off the bat that stood out to me, again, great beat and a great bass line.
Yeah.
Absolutely killer. This rhythm section, and I have to say this as an overall general thing, because I know we're talking about different musicians from song to song, but he's really good at getting a good rhythm section.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
very, very tight, it feels like they read each other well, almost like they're brothers
Yeah.
who are playing together in a band. They just feel that close to me. Not close to me, but they feel that close, in my opinion.
Yeah.
This song, I really like the sound of this because it sounded like it was from the 60s. It had a really unique audio quality to it, which I really dug because I knew it was a more modern song.
Yep.
But it had that production value where it just felt really old school, reel to reel, old amps, old microphones, a little bit grainy, that kind of thing. I love that old guitar distortion sound.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
perfection and
Buzzsaw, and it's got that buzzsaw attack to it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. What I put, I thought there was a little bit of distortion on Tom's voice, just the slightest amount, but it also could have been in that style of that recording, because if they were going for that 60s sound and they wanted it to be a little rougher and a little bit more grainy, they might have added it for that reason, but I definitely detected a little bit of that in there.
Right.
It also could have been that they were purposely clipping his voice so that it would shelf and cut out a little bit.
Yeah.
Either whatever technique they used, they definitely did something that was very obvious, because at this point, I don't think they would have accepted a shitty take.
No.
They would have said, we got to do this again. So this has to be calculated.
Yeah, I should just, so I do throw in little nerdy things into the podcast every now and again.
Mhm.
Explain to the listeners what clipping is, because not everyone will know what that term means.
So clipping is, so if you've ever watched a meter on anything, it could be your home stereo, your cassette player, whatever it is, and you see it go into the red, and then it just kind of stays red for a second, and it's really bright and it's yelling and screaming at you to turn the volume down. That's kind of what clipping is. It basically, it's going to cut off the sound and distort it at some point. You're not getting a nice, warm, clean sound anymore because you've pushed the level beyond what the input can handle and record cleanly. And it's going to give you some weird sound. Was that a good description, do you think?
Perfect. Absolutely
okay,
perfect. Good. Yeah.
I usually use baking references. I don't know why I didn't on this one. There's a chord that plays into the verse that is kind of a lower chord. I don't know what the chord is or how they're making this happen, but there is just such a mood that it gives the song that it doesn't have anywhere else in the song. It's just when they strike this one chord. And I really dug that.
Yeah.
I thought this is such a brilliant idea, and it gives the song such a different feel in this spot only. And I really love that. I thought that was cool. Again, I kind of feel that the song is a little bit repetitive, but it's also very catchy.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you don't mind that it's repetitive. It's like the album Slide It In by Whitesnake, where almost every song just repeats the chorus into the fade. And you're like, yeah, I know. But it's so catchy that you're like, all right, I'm just going to take this ride because it's enjoyable to listen. It's not to the point of annoyance, but the song has a really good feel to it. I really did like this one.
Yeah, I mean, so as a drummer, one of the things that I love about this song is, and I don't know if you picked up on it, if you didn't, go back and listen to it. Baroni's playing on the ride bell throughout most of it. He's playing this weird little bossa nova beat that, again, it's one of those things that I can play it, but I cannot play it. You know what I mean? Like I just can't get the feel of it. It's like, because I don't play that I don't play those South American polyrhythms. I don't do all that kind of stuff. So when you get that bit of Latin flair into this, because the rest of it's fairly straight, right? It's not 4/4, but it's not quite a backbeat, but it's not far off. But to throw that in, it gives it this weird dynamic that I just absolutely adore. And there's nothing in this song that he sings, on the high wire above the wildfire, an old acrobat on faulty cable, still he's able not to fall flat. So you've got that 1-1-2 1-1-2 rhyme scheme, and it's just it's so punchy. And again, it's that thing about Petty always had this way of sort of throwing at least one line into every song that you think, I wish I'd written that.
Yep. I get you on that. I would say are you a traditional or a match grip guy?
match. Yeah,
Okay, so I would
unfortunately.
say try playing. Well, no, because if you're mostly playing rock and roll, that's fine because
Yeah.
you're really limited when you play traditional grip in a lot of ways. But I would say for when you're trying, if you're trying to play some bossa nova stuff, try playing it with the traditional grip and use your left hand.
Okay.
If you're right-handed, use your left hand to do those accents and see if that feels a little bit better. Tilt your hand a little bit more
Okay.
and play more with the side than with a down strike and see how that
Interesting.
feels.
Okay. I'll give
It
that a
may
go
or
then.
may not work for you. That works for me a lot of times because I find
Cool, man.
if I'm attacking everything from a downward stroke,
Yeah.
it's harder to get some of that syncopation.
Okay, let's wrap things up
Yeah,
on the petty side. So the format that I came up with is I'm going to ask you to put together an EP. So basically your three favorite songs from the ones I gave you, and
yeah.
then which one are we going to take off the petty eight, and I have to replace for the next guest. So what's
Yeah,
your EP? Which of the three songs you'd put on your EP?
okay, so the first, and I'm going to just pick these in order
Sure.
because the way I do these, like I don't memorize the Aerosmith songs. There's just too many of them, and I like from week to
Yeah.
week, I'm like I remember. So I color code everything on my
Okay.
spreadsheet. That's how what works for me. So the first one I'm going to pick is the apartment song.
Okay.
I think that belongs on the EP. The second one I'm going to pick is Saving Grace, and the third one is Fault Lines.
Perfect.
I almost picked Jefferson Jericho Blues. I think just like I said, because that would just be so much fun to play. It's such a fun song, but I think Fault Lines would, if I was saying three songs out of these to represent, I would say Fault Lines would be the better song
Right on, man.
overall.
Good selections.
Thank you. The song I would drop would be the first one, Fooled Again.
Okay.
And that really comes down to, I don't think that's really a way I would suggest people get into him because of the vocal, because again, he's playing that character.
Yeah.
I think it's a very young song. I see potential in the song, but I don't see the song.
Yeah. I know. I totally get what you mean. I 100%. It is a young song.
Yeah.
And it's recorded by a band that doesn't really have a ton of studio craft yet.
Mm-hmm.
Tom and Mike and Ben Mont have recorded a couple of singles from Mudcrutch way back in the day, but Ron Blair and Stan Lynch and they're coming in pretty cold and they haven't really worked with the band yet. So yeah, absolutely. I totally get it.
I did have a couple of overall notes on the songs if you'd like to hear them.
Absolutely.
So one thing, and again, I'm only judging by these 8 songs and a couple of the hits that I know. Won't Back Down was another one that I know. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's been licensed for some movies. Seems like a good, like an action adventure type.
About a million.
About a million. Okay, there you go. It's probably up there with like Bad to the Bone.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of starts and stops that I think that kind of gets a little bit old. But again, I'm only looking at this collection. So over the course that might mean absolutely nothing. I don't really like him as a vocalist. I like him as a lyricist. I think he's got some great lyricists. But this is why I've never really dug into his music, is because so his eyelids, if you look at his eyelids, they're a little heavy, right? He always looks like he's about to fall asleep. That's how he sounds to me as a vocalist. And I don't mean that in I know that sounds mean, and I don't mean that in a mean way.
Yeah.
But I'm used to listening to more dynamic singers. So this is not, and again, it's not really my genre, but I do find a lot of good stuff in these songs, as you've heard through my comments.
Yeah.
I think he gets a great mix. Like most of the stuff that we've talked about, I think the mix is great, other than like one or two little adjustments I would make here and there. But the vocals are, and ironically, it's the vocals that seem to be off the most. They're either a little too loud or a little too soft.
Okay.
And that's funny because it's really a vocalist with a backing band. You know, it's not the Heartbreakers. It's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Some of the songs, like I said, get a little bit repetitive. And I don't mind repetition if there's variation to it. Like if you're going to sing or every verse is going to sound the same, you got to put in a little filler here and there, just a little something to make it different from time to time. And then, sometimes, I mean, you could do it with different words or a different style, but he seems very linear a lot of times in the way he sings. Like, this is how the verse goes. Not this is how this verse goes. This is how the verses go. And he finds that cadence that he likes to repeat. So I don't know if he writes the lyrics to the cadence or if that's just how it comes out naturally, but I did pick up on that a little bit. And again, only judging on these 8 songs and a couple of other ones that I know that I didn't listen to directly. So nothing mean-spirited at all. But I do, there's a reason he was as successful as he was, and why his legacy will go on for generations to come.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. No, that, I really have nothing. There's not, well, I'm going to say a rebuttal. That's because that sounds a bit combative. No, that's what you take away from an artist is, as we said early on, that's very personal.
Mhm.
That's down to you. And as you know, I always tell people, like, I cannot listen to Pearl Jam, I can't listen to Neil Young, and I can't listen to the Smiths, even though I know all three of those bands slash artists are brilliant songwriters, brilliant bands, but the vocalist's voice, it's not that it's a bad voice, it just doesn't resonate with me. So if the
Yeah.
voice doesn't resonate with you, it's tough to get past that.
He's not my singer.
Yeah,
But I would say I found some really good stuff in here that I was very impressed with and enjoyed. So I appreciate you exposing me to this stuff. And I always really go into this, anything that I'm unfamiliar with, I go into it with the optimism of, let's see what it is.
Yeah.
Never, I'm probably not going to like this, or I already know I don't like this genre, or I already know I don't like I really just, let's just see what it is and go from there. I'm either going to enjoy it or not, or I'll find good things or not, So yeah, there's definitely some good stuff in all of these songs, even the one I really didn't like.
Well, and that is the main reason that I wanted you to be my guinea pig for this format, because I knew that you would come in with an open mind, and I've listened to your voice enough on the shows that you do that I knew that I would get an articulate, intelligent, informed opinion with some reasoning behind it, not just that sucks, right? So I thank you very, very much for this. Let the people know
Thank you.
where they can find you, what you're doing, what they should look for, all the things. I mean, this is another half an hour now to tell people what you do.
Right. Yeah. It's always I should
go ahead.
write some sort of consolidated version. Okay. So I'm an author. You can find all of my books on my Amazon author page. They were kind enough to offer me one. I think I was working on my third book at the time, and they're like, here's an author page. I'm like, oh, okay, great. I've got 9 books there now. The hub for everything is my website, scotthaskin.com. There are links to, my Amazon page. All my albums are there. I've got 31 albums out. All the podcasts can be streamed on my website. There are, between Uriah Heep and the Haskin Cast podcast, I'm getting close to 730, I think, episodes. So quite a bit. And then links to, films I've worked on and all. It's all on the website, scotthaskin.com. And then my band, Era Patches, we're based out of Montreal. I've actually never met any of them. I'm the recording drummer. And I've done one album with them, and we're, I think, talking about doing another one. Great progressive band, a lot of fun, really challenging to not be working in the space and creating with the band. But Era Patches, that's all on my website, the link to the album and all that good stuff. So yeah, I would just say go to the website. That's probably the best place to find all the things I'm doing now.
So 9 books, 31 albums, 730 podcast episodes, 1,200 or so pieces of music. Just as a final quick question then, when do you sleep?
Let me Google that.